last near 17, on a brother's horse to Iceland, and the world she's never seen. Over land and sea to Reykjavik, far away from father's eye, past the lava fields and glaciers and Mount Hitler's violent fire. From the northwest fjords of Iceland came last near 17, on a brother's horse to Iceland, and a world she's never seen. Puffins and eider ducks fly, and where hot springs and sulphur streams flow, with a torrent of cool frost descends, we misty air as it goes. From the northwest fjords of Iceland came last near 17, on a brother's horse to Isafjord, and a world she's never seen. Jesus with water high in the air, to where fast tricks and moonscape are seen. For my trees are so rare, they're a sight to behold, and my sagas relate what has been. From the northwest fjords of Iceland came last near 17, on a brother's horse to Isafjord, a world she's never seen.
We're on board His Majesty's ship Nelson, with the destroyer Crescent following in our wake, bound for Iceland. As the destroyer yaws and rolls on the heavy sea, Nelson's deck is as steady as a rock. In fact, steady enough for deck hockey. The long inlet on the Iceland coast provides excellent harbourage, and it's not long before we're ashore and realising that the capital, Reykjavik, is as modern as any European town. The Icelanders, too, are keen on athletics and sports, and a water polo match was soon arranged with a team from Nelson. You'd think the water was cold, but actually it's an artificial lake warmed by water from the hot springs. The geysers provide hot water on tap all the time. It gushes up from the underground springs. The Icelanders turn them to good account, and communal laundries save gas and coal bills at home. The only real justification for the island's name is the great ice fields which cover some of the mountains and cause tongues of glacial ice to push their way down to the valleys. Some of these are a mile wide, and round them flow rivers of ice-cold water. The chief industry here is fishing, cod being the most important. These are split open, salted and dried in the sun. Fish seems to be sold by the length instead of weight. We should think 1.5 yards of cod would make a good meal. Iceland, with all its modernity, is a land of volcanic mountains and deep gorges, the result of great physical disturbances. In parts the country is wild, and as there are no trains, travelling is difficult. Roads are increasing and improving, but generally cars must take the rough tracks made by previous vehicles. Over 1,000 years ago, the Icelanders decided to have a national parliament, and a site was chosen that had water, space and shelter for a large number of people. This valley was the site of the world's oldest parliament. Bridges are expensive, so cars often have to take this course. Some of the deep rivers are spanned by suspension bridges. This one was built by an English engineer many years ago. When the snows melt high up in the mountains, rivers become torrents as the water pours down from the snows. The rivers cut channels for themselves, taking the easiest routes and forming lovely cascades and rapids. Where the cliffs are high, the waters tumble over in a gleaming cascade and thunder down into the lower paths to form great lakes. Then they start another depression in the land of depressions.
From thoughts of autumn to glimpses of Iceland. Though it just comes within the Arctic Circle, Iceland isn't as icy as you might think. We're approaching the capital, Reykjavik, on the Bay of Faxaflor. It's a young town, with the buildings in the newer part built of concrete, and those in the older part of timber covered with corrugated iron. Here's the broadcasting station where all the deep depressions come from. In spite of its high latitude, the climate is relatively mild, and it's an old Icelandic custom to sit about in shirt sleeves even in the winter. Hot springs abound, especially in the volcanic areas, and the Icelanders have taken advantage of nature's H&C arrangement in their commercial undertakings. And Mrs. Icelander finds the permanent hot water supply most useful for domestic purposes. Over the communal wash tub, a grating prevents Mrs. I from joining the smalls. Even greenhouses are heated by the same means, and a growing industry in garden produce, bulbs and the like, owes its expansion to the country's natural resources. Was anything ever so fantastic as hothouses in Iceland? But here you are. Where the people are as hard as nails. Iceland, land of strange contrasts. In a previous issue, we showed you its hot springs and greenhouses. Now we're in a mood to enjoy its rugged beauty. Off the west coast, mountains rise from the sea, and in one of the fjords is Stykkishólm's harbour, with a quaint little fishing town beyond. Among the many strange sights in a strange island is the huge lava plain at Thingvellir. It has a lake at one end and mountains at the other, and is bordered by two walls of rock about 3 miles apart and almost parallel. It was in these wild surroundings, at least so it's recorded, that the oldest existing parliament assembled early in the 10th century. In those days, laws and lava seemed to go together. Iceland is rich in waterfalls. The great number of streams of large volume is due to the moist climate and glaciers, and nearly all of them change their course and form waterfalls. The most famous is the Gullfoss, the Golden Waterfall. And isn't it a grand spectacle? From the music of the falls to the music of a charming old ballad, On a Way Awake Beloved, sung by that celebrated West...
I have recently returned from a visit to the British troops in Iceland, and I feel sure that you will be interested in a film showing their many and numerous activities in that distant island. You will recall that immediately after the German invasion of Norway and Denmark, Iceland was occupied by British troops to safeguard the independence of the inhabitants and to ensure that the island was not used as a base for enemy activities. Iceland, with a population of 117,000 people, is larger than Ireland, and it has a coastline of 1,500 miles. It is situated in the North Atlantic, about 500 miles northwest of the Shetlands and 250 miles southeast of Greenland, which, incidentally, was first visited by Icelanders in the 10th century. The British soldier, with his renowned fighting qualities, is often our best diplomat, and his arrival in Iceland has brought new interest into the lives of the Icelandic people, a friendly and hospitable folk. To all those who live or who are stationed in this northern isle, whether proud Icelander, British sailor, soldier or airman, we send our good wishes for the future.
Would you impress upon the listener how pivotal the role was for the United States to be in Iceland? You go there, what is a major, in October of 1941, before Pearl Harbor.
No, I went over there as a first lieutenant, but I rose real fast, very rapidly. I was almost immediately after we were there, I was made the aide-de-camp to the commanding general and promoted to captain right away. We arrived there in September, but the planning of it had gone forward for several months. Iceland was a pivotal factor in the international scene back in early 41. The British had occupied Iceland with the troops that I think had got out of Dunkirk, but it was a limited number of personnel that they had. And there was a intercept of codes which the British got from Germany that the Germans were going to invade Iceland. I don't know all the political details that went on from there, but I do know that in late spring, my general got called to Washington and was told to form a contingent of a task force of not less than 15,000 men to go to Iceland to supplement and to assist the British if necessary, although we were not in war. We couldn't get together 15,000 men because they'd had selective service law, which was enacted at the time and allowed most of the men to service 1 year. And they would be out in October. Therefore, it was decided that we better send up, in a hurry, we better send up a regiment of Marines. So the Marines got up there in July ahead of us. But in the meantime, we are forming our group of all regular Army soldiers and officers. And we went up there in September and relieved the Marines shortly thereafter, and they went back home. It was a sort of an arduous task because Iceland was, they only had 125,000 people in the whole country. And of course we needed communications on all of the islands at various posts around north, south, east, and west. So we established telephones and all sorts of things and modernized the roads and made Iceland into a modern little community, so to speak. We had diplomatic problems, of course, because the poor little Iceland was overwhelmed by all these American troops being up there, but we got along rather well. It was a problem because the Marines, previous to us, had gotten themselves involved with some Icelandic ladies, and trouble started very, very rapidly. I remember having lunch one day in Glasgow, Scotland, with Douglas Fairbanks and one of his other cohorts, famous movie stars, and they both agreed that Iceland had the prettiest girls in the world. So that was quite a compliment for Iceland, I must say.
No wonder the Marines had such a tough time.
That's exactly right. The Marines had a very tough time. I was, it was kind of a tenuous thing because at that time Iceland was the focal point of a great deal of news because here we were not in war and we were going up into a combat zone of the war in Europe. And accordingly, all of the newspapers, including the New York Times and the AP, UP, and INS and so forth, had their reporters up there. So we had quite a large contingent of news people. And suddenly we got a call one day that we hadn't been up there only about 2 months, I guess. And I got a call at an emergency from the Navy that the German submarines had torpedoed the USS Kearney, which is a destroyer, American destroyer. And the general called me in and said that we better get out there and take a look at it. But it was a bit of a problem. How are we going to get out there and look at it? You know, the submarines around there. So what we did, we went down and got the chief of police, and he gave us a Icelandic fishing trawler so that the Germans wouldn't shoot at an Icelandic fishing trawler, you know. And I went out there, and the Kearney was indeed, it was badly damaged with several casualties, Americans killed on board the destroyer. I came back to the base at Iceland, and the problem was, how do we keep this from the newspapermen? Because this means it's an act of war, and we're not in war. So we tried to keep it as much as we could within ourselves and get all the information back to Washington and let them make the decisions of how they wanted to handle it. And it was successful that we did that. The newspaper people, of course, were unhappy at the fact that we didn't give them the news, but it was a very tenuous time because it could have been something that we could have made big stories out of it and maybe aroused the American people that here the Germans are sinking our warships, you know. Then it wasn't too long after that we shot down a Focke-Wulf German airplane, a four-engine plane, over Iceland, and it was up in the mountains and near the glaciers. And I had the assignment of take a contingent of men up there to see what, if anything, was recoverable or was a living soldiers of the Germans and so forth. And it took us a couple of days to get up to it. And maybe longer than that. It was very difficult traveling in that type of terrain. But I got up there, and of course the Germans were all killed, and I had the remains of everything searched as far as we could, and I found one very important code book, which was extremely important. I didn't realize its importance at the time, although I knew it was a code book, and I took it myself, and after a few days got back down to the base headquarters again, and then we saw that we really had something, because all of the codes of the Germans for the airplanes to the submarines and all sorts of things, here was the German code all handed to us, you know. And when we telegraphed our headquarters over in London, and they got excited, sent a B-24 up and sent me down with the code book, and I turned it over to them, and they in turn, of course, got it to Bletchley Park and other places, and it turned out to be a real boon to the people who were decoding of the Germans, because it told everything it was. And I was pretty tired about this time, I remember, and people say, well, how'd you like the British? That was my first experience with the British. And how I remember was I was so tired and exhausted, they put me up in a little private home, and I went to bed, and I guess I slept a long time, and I got up in the morning to go down and get my breakfast. And a very charming lady was sitting across from me, and I sat and waited and waited. Nobody waited on me. There were no waiters. And I said, do they not have breakfast here? She said, oh, are you waiting for a breakfast? I said, yes. Oh, she said, I'm sorry, I fed it to my dog. You know. And so my first acquaintance with the British was not particularly happy one.
The tempo of war increases and America's military pulse beats faster as shiploads of her troops set out for a destination unannounced at the time of sailing. Patrolling the harbour to prevent any interruptions in sailing schedules, naval landing boats skim around as bulging shiploads of doughboys set out on a great adventure. We know now that President Roosevelt has resolved to ensure the safety of communications between the United States and Iceland. The British troops in occupation of Iceland are needed elsewhere and have been replaced by Americans. The new army will take over for the duration of the war only. No more will British tanks roar across Iceland's fields or British guns rumble over the roads, for the Yanks are coming. The Icelanders will miss our boys, but Uncle Sam is relieving us of some of our responsibilities. The United States could not allow Germany's strategic outposts in the Atlantic to be used as bases for eventual attack on the Western Hemisphere. Mr. Roosevelt is a big jump ahead of the Nazis. These further pictures taken by our cameraman in Iceland show the arrival of more American troops at the harbor of Reykjavik. In his own words, the disembarkation was carried out without a hitch, despite rain and a biting wind which made the task far from pleasant. Comfortable quarters prepared by an advance guard are awaiting them, however, and lorry loads of damp doughboys head for them. The domestic side of life in Iceland is greatly assisted by the natural hot springs on the island. A constant supply of hot water is a washerwoman's dream come true. Why, this is something like every Conf, H&C, Mod Con, outdoor sand, etc. Conveyed by pipes, the naturally heated water serves the hothouses in which are grown a wonderful variety of flowers, fruits and vegetables. Cripes, grapes, and tomatoes like the pictures on seed packets. And according to our cameraman, these other things are bananas. He ate one, the lucky banana. The most popular ship that sails into Iceland is the vessel with a good cargo of mail. Willing hands set to work to unload the mail bags containing letters and parcels for the American troops stationed there. Sackloads of welcome sentiment from the States. The sorting room in the military post office gets down to the job. Good news travels fast, and a lot of news-hungry doughboys are on their toes for messages from home. Here comes Corporal Joseph Gagliardo to receive his mail.
Nissen Hut Avenue never did look exactly pretty. But when Joe comes striding home with the goods, there are roses round the door. Knock, knock, who's there? Joe with an armload of parcels. Come in, friend, you're just the fella they've been waiting for. Well, Joe, you always were a nice sort of a guy. But today there's something about you that'll make you realize what a lot of friends you've got. But blow me down, it's not all candy and cookies in Iceland. When a gale comes sailing down from the Arctic, even the Nissen huts afford meager protection. Sweeping down at 85 miles an hour, it rips the sheet iron huts to pieces. Yes, mail day counts for a lot in this tough little island up north.
Iceland, guardian of the United Nations North Atlantic lifeline. 1,800 air miles from Halifax, 825 miles from Scotland, and only 900 from Nazi-held Norway. To this subarctic island during the summer of 1941 came the vanguard of an American expeditionary force. This film depicts Iceland as it looked between November 1941 and early spring 1942. Protected by a long spit of land, forming a natural breakwater, is the outer harbor of Reykjavik, Iceland's principal city. The airport, the city, the outer and inner harbors. Because of limited docking facilities and the lack of deep-water piers capable of accommodating the larger ships, the discharge of cargo is delayed for weeks at a time. In many cases, ships are compelled to wait in the outer harbor as long as 7 weeks, and in some instances are ordered home fully laden. Added to this is the problem of the tide. During low tide, deep draft merchantmen like the Delta are obliged to leave the pier and await the return of high water. Many others are unloaded by tank lighters. This entire congested area offers a highly vulnerable target for attack. Since the port at Reykjavik is the only port in Iceland, all supplies and materials must be distributed throughout the island by trucks traveling over spongy, unimproved, one-way winding roads and over narrow country bridges. The United States Army is laying better road beds and is widening and strengthening the bridges to permit the passage of heavier trucks and tanks. The ice-free fjords, Hvalfjord and Eyjafjord, if extensively developed, could serve as auxiliary ports and relieve the unloading and distributing problem that now confronts our armed forces in the island. The Naval Air Station in Skirifjord, showing the bomber squadron. Construction of the prefabricated Quonset huts proceeded rapidly despite the lack of tools needed to erect them. Sections of tongue and groove wood flooring form the foundation upon which a framework of curved angle irons are set. The framework is then covered by, first, sheets of compressed fiberboard, second, a layer of rock wool to provide insulation, and third, by corrugated sheet metal. The doors and windows are interchangeable. All roads to the air station like this one were built by manual labor. The swampy topsoil was scraped away, a bed of rock laid down, and a layer of coarse volcanic gravel, followed by a layer of fine gravel, resulted in a fairly good road. While the construction of quarters was underway, the members of the bomber squadron, when not on patrol, dug and built 10 sandbag-protected gun emplacements. The guns, 50mm anti-aircraft pieces, were part of the bomber patrol's reserve equipment. The completed camp awaiting official inspection by Admiral Kaufman and his staff. Warm, well-lighted, and comfortable. The old galley and the new. Adjoining the Naval Air Station in Skerryfjord is a small, courageous unit of Norwegian flyers. Flying British-supplied, American-built Northrops, these heroic men, in fair weather or foul, managed to maintain a daily patrol. One 17-year-old lad is credited with sinking 3 Nazi submarines. For protection against storms or air attack, the flyers have cut out revetments in the shore bank. Planes are moved to and from the water by a homemade wheeling device fastened to the pontoons. On shore, this is fairly simple. In the icy waters, a grueling task. The Reykjavik Airport, a well-developed airfield for land-based planes on the island. In this camouflaged hangar, all planes are serviced and maintained. Besides the field at Reykjavik, there are 4 other land and sea bases. At Caldardanes, a 2-way, well-improved field capable of repairing and supplying all planes. At Hornafjord, a 2-way land plane field with no supplies. At Budereri, an ice-free seaplane base with limited supplies. At Akureyri, an ice-free seaplane and land plane base. Thingvallavatn is a volcanic lake, ice-free and fog-free, which in an emergency can serve as a landing base for seaplanes. Plans call for a field to be developed at Keflavik and in other suitable areas throughout the island. But the principal burden of patrol rests on the Navy's PBYs, moored in Skerryfjord. On January 13, 1942, a wind of intense velocity came crashing down on the island, leaving a path of destruction in its wake. The harbor was a churning maelstrom. Many cargo ships were beached, lighter vessels were blown ashore. The PBYs weren't spared. Because these ships were not of the amphibian class, and in the absence of preparation for such an unexpected hurricane, 5 of these much-needed planes were sent to the bottom. Abated. Salvage crews set to work. There was little left to salvage. Only one amphibian, secured ashore, withstood the gale. A few days later, amphibians arrived to replace the PBYs that were lost. This disaster will not occur again. Organized communication with Greenland and other meteorological stations has been established to give ample warning in the event of an approaching storm. Fjord, a sheltered retreat for all men of war of the Allied nations. Protected by lofty ice peaks, this deep fjord provides a haven for naval vessels of all classes while refueling and undergoing minor repair. The submarine and torpedo nets guard the entrance to the narrow mouth of the fjord. There is considerable controversy among authorities as to the wisdom of concentrating many warships here. It is argued that apart from being an easy target, it would be a difficult place to evacuate in an emergency. The USS Kearney, after being torpedoed, made for Kvalfjord and was patched up by the Navy's Vulcan before returning to a Boston dry dock. Our camera crew, dispersed on many vessels of a convoy, proceeds toward Halifax. A PBY patrol plane operating from Iceland warns that an enemy submarine has been sighted in the vicinity. An alert is given. All hands to battle stations. From aboard a cruiser, scouting planes are catapulted into the air. A destroyer, taking direction from the scouting planes, drops its deadly ash cans and hits its mark. The signal to cease fire. In the wake of the cruiser, a smoke bomb is dropped. This indicates the direction of the wind and assists the scouting plane in landing in the turbulent waters. A perfect landing. Note how the pilot drops the hook in the tow net. Hoisting planes aboard while underway requires organized and coordinated teamwork. This crew seems to know its business. The convoy reforms and proceeds on its zigzag course. Again, a patrol plane appears overhead. This time it brings news that the British merchantman Wildebeest was torpedoed and sunk, that about 25 members of her crew are afloat in 2 lifeboats. The USS Lang says that she will go to their rescue, but will require refueling upon her return. The tanker Sapelo agrees to stand by to supply the fuel. About 2 days later, after what seemed a hopeless search, the Lang returns with the survivors safely aboard. The refueling operations begin. A ticklish job when done under favorable sea conditions. This was particularly difficult because both vessels had to keep moving. These waters are sub-infested. The job was done in record time. 37,000 gallons of fuel oil for a crate of canned pineapple. Thank you, Sapelo. Well done.
sun wherever it'll shine, in its own precious light so free, light wind day, soft still night. One kiss like 1,000 years, in one glimpse that stops time. The moment is gone, but remember, strange look, your prowling eyes, your prowling eyes. It really doesn't matter. No one who really seems to care. Is there anyone out there? No one really seems to care. That one life like a trillion stains is extinguished, riddled with lead rain. It leaves nothing for blank eyes that stare. Those eyes are empty, it's dark over there. It leaves nothing for blank eyes that stare. Those eyes are empty, it's dark over there. 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 just one of a billion needs. Some God thought we were all content, so then he cursed us with grace.